The blood on Lydia Norton's hands wouldn't wash away, no matter how hard she scrubbed in the creek water, though it was only flour dust turned red by the setting New Mexico sun that painted everything crimson on that August evening in 1878. She knelt by the water's edge just outside Las Lunas, her calico dress soaked at the hem, tears streaming down her face as she whispered prayers of forgiveness for people who had taken everything from her. The Bennett brothers had burned her family's modest ranch house to the ground 3 days prior, killed her father in cold blood over a property dispute, and left her with nothing but the clothes on her back, and a heart so shattered she wasn't sure it would ever beat properly again. Owen Brennan saw her from the ridge above, silhouetted against the dying light, and something in his chest twisted with recognition though they had never met. He had ridden into Las Lunas that very afternoon, another drifter cowboy looking for work and trying to outrun his own demons, the kind that came from too many years of fighting and not enough years of living right. His horse, a gray gelding named Ash, nickered softly as if sensing his rider's sudden change in attention. Owen dismounted slowly, his boots crunching on the dry earth as he made his way down the slope. He had learned long ago to approach strangers carefully in this territory, but something about the woman's posture spoke of defeat rather than danger. She didn't even turn when he called out, his voice rough from days of silence on the trail. "Madam, you all right down there?" Lydia's shoulders tensed, and she finally looked up, her green eyes red-rimmed and wary. She stood quickly, smoothing her dress in an automatic gesture of propriety that spoke to the upbringing her father had insisted upon despite their humble circumstances. "I'm fine, thank you. Just heading back to town." "Town's 3 miles that way," Owen said, gesturing in the direction she wasn't looking. "And the sun's nearly gone. These roads aren't safe after dark." "I'm well aware," Lydia said, her voice sharper than she intended. She softened immediately, remembering her father's words about kindness even in the face of hardship. "I apologize. You're right, of course. I lost track of time." Owen stepped closer, keeping his hands visible and his demeanor unthreatening. Years of hard living had made him look older than his 26 years, his face weathered and lined from sun and trouble, but his eyes held a gentleness that surprised people. "I've got a camp about a mile from here. Got coffee and beans if you're hungry. Can take you into town come morning if you need." Lydia studied him carefully, weighing her options. She had been staying in the back room of the Mercantile in Las Lunas, working for her keep by sweeping floors and organizing stock, but Mrs. Henderson had made it clear that the arrangement was temporary. The truth was Lydia had nowhere to go and no one to turn to. Her mother had died in childbirth when Lydia was 10, taking the baby brother with her, and her father had been her only family. At 22 years old, she found herself completely alone in a territory that showed little mercy to solitary women. "That's kind of you," Lydia finally said, "but I couldn't impose. I'll manage the walk." "Wasn't really asking, madam," Owen said, and though his tone remained respectful, there was steel underneath. "Like I said, these roads aren't safe. There's been trouble with raiders, and a woman alone is asking for worse than trouble. You can trust me or not, that's your choice, but I'll be riding alongside you either way to make sure you get somewhere safe." There was something in his directness that Lydia appreciated. She had grown tired of false pleasantries and empty promises. This stranger was at least honest about his intentions, even if she wasn't entirely sure she believed him. Still, he was right about the danger, and she was exhausted in ways that went far beyond physical tiredness. "All right," she said quietly. "I accept your offer of coffee, but I'll need to be in town by dawn. Mrs. Henderson expects me to open the Mercantile." Owen nodded and retrieved Ash, helping Lydia mount before swinging up behind her. She stiffened at the proximity, but he kept a respectful distance as much as was possible, sharing a saddle, and his hands on the reins were steady and sure. They rode in silence through the gathering darkness, the desert alive with the sounds of evening creatures beginning their nightly routines. His camp was simple, just a bedroll and a small fire ring with coals still glowing from his earlier meal. Owen helped Lydia down and immediately set about building up the fire and putting coffee on to boil. He moved with the efficiency of someone who had lived rough for years, every motion economical and purposeful. "You can have the bedroll," Owen said, not looking at her as he worked. "I'll keep watch." "I can't take your bed," Lydia protested. "Already decided, madam. No use arguing about it." Lydia settled herself on a rock near the fire, watching him in the flickering light. "My name is Lydia Norton. If we're sharing a camp, you might as well use it." "Owen Brennan," he replied, glancing up at her with a slight smile that transformed his serious face. "Pleased to make your acquaintance, Miss Norton, though I wish it were under better circumstances. You want to talk about what had you crying by that creek, or you want to leave it be?" Lydia was quiet for a long moment, listening to the coffee begin to bubble. She hadn't talked about what happened to anyone except the sheriff, and that had been a cold recitation of facts for his official report. The Bennett brothers were sons of Marcus Bennett, who owned half the land around Las Lunas and most of the water rights. The sheriff had been sympathetic but clear that there was little he could do without proof, and the two men who worked for the Bennetts had conveniently provided alibis for their bosses. "My father was killed 3 days ago," Lydia said finally, her voice steady though it cost her. "Murdered over a piece of land that wasn't worth dying for. The men who did it will never face justice because they have money and power and I have nothing." Owen's jaw tightened, and he poured coffee into 2 tin cups with hands that had gone tense. "I'm sorry. That's a hard thing to bear." "The hardest part isn't even the loss," Lydia continued, surprised at her own willingness to confide in this stranger. Perhaps it was because he was a stranger that she could speak freely, knowing he would ride on soon and take her words with him. "The hardest part is the anger. I can feel it eating away at me, turning me into someone my father wouldn't recognize. He always said that holding on to anger was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. So I've been trying to forgive them." "Forgive the men who killed your father." Owen's voice held disbelief. "I'm trying to," Lydia said, accepting the coffee he offered. "Not because they deserve it, but because I do. I deserve to be free of this weight. Forgiveness isn't about them, Mr. Brennan. It's about me choosing not to let their evil plant seeds in my own heart." Owen sat down across from her, his own coffee forgotten in his hands as he stared at her. In all his years of drifting, fighting, and surviving, he had never met anyone who spoke like this woman did. He had seen hardness and bitterness in abundance, had carried plenty of both himself, but here was someone actively choosing a different path. The grace in that choice hit him like a physical blow. "That's about the most remarkable thing I've ever heard anyone say," Owen said quietly. "Most people would be planning revenge." "Revenge won't bring my father back," Lydia replied, warming her hands on the cup. "It won't rebuild our home or restore what was taken. All it would do is continue the cycle. Someone hurts you, so you hurt them back, so they hurt you worse, and on until everyone is dead or broken. I refuse to participate in that dance." They talked long into the night, the conversation flowing more easily than either had expected. Owen found himself telling her about his own past, things he rarely spoke of with anyone. He had been raised on a small farm in Missouri, the youngest of 4 sons. When the war came, his 3 older brothers had marched off to fight, and only one had returned, changed in ways that made him a stranger. Owen had left home at 17, the year the war ended, unable to bear watching his brother drink himself to death and his parents pretend everything was fine. He had drifted west, working as a hired hand on various ranches, learning to break horses and mend fences and survive on little. "I've done things I'm not proud of," Owen admitted, staring into the fire. "Worked for some men who turned out to be worse than the people they claimed to be fighting against. Got blood on my hands that won't ever wash clean. Sometimes I think I'm just drifting, waiting for my past to catch up with me." "Everyone deserves a chance to change," Lydia said firmly. "The fact that you're troubled by your past means you're not the same person who committed those acts. You've already changed, Mr. Brennan. You just need to forgive yourself now." Owen looked at her then, really looked at her, and felt something shift in his chest. Here was a woman who had every reason to be bitter and angry, who had lost everything. And yet she spoke of forgiveness and grace as if they were simple choices anyone could make. The strength that took, the courage, was beyond anything he had encountered in all his travels. In that moment, he knew with sudden certainty that meeting her was not an accident, that perhaps all his wandering had been leading him to this creek outside Las Lunas, to this woman who might just save him from himself. "You should get some rest," Owen said, his voice rougher than he intended. "I'll wake you before dawn." Lydia nodded and moved to the bedroll, settling in fully clothed except for her boots. She fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted by grief and the strange comfort of having spoken her truth aloud. Owen kept watch as promised, feeding the fire and thinking thoughts that felt dangerous in their hopefulness. He had long ago stopped believing in salvation or second chances, but Lydia Norton made him want to believe again. True to his word, Owen woke her as the sky was just beginning to lighten in the east, that pearl-gray moment before sunrise when the world holds its breath. He had fresh coffee ready and some jerky to chew on for breakfast. They didn't speak much as they broke camp, but the silence was comfortable now, marked by a strange sense of understanding. The ride back to Las Lunas was quiet, Lydia once again seated in front of Owen on ash, but she found she didn't mind the proximity as much as she had the night before. There was something solid and dependable about Owen Brennan, a steadiness that made her feel safe for the first time since her father's death. When they reached the edge of town, she reluctantly asked him to let her down. "Mrs. Henderson would have questions I'm not ready to answer if she sees me arriving with a man," Lydia explained, smoothing her dress and trying to make herself presentable. "I understand," Owen said, but he didn't immediately ride away. "Miss Norton, I was planning to move on today, but if you've no objection, I think I might stay in Las Lunas for a while. See if there's work to be had." Lydia felt her heart skip in a way that was both alarming and pleasant. "That would be nice, Mr. Brennan. I'm sure someone needs a good hand." "Mr. Peterson at the livery is always complaining about being short-staffed." "I'll inquire there then," Owen said, touching the brim of his hat in farewell. "Take care of yourself, Miss Norton, and Lydia. Yes, what you're doing with the forgiveness and all. That takes more courage than anything I've ever done. Don't let anyone tell you different." He rode off before she could respond, leaving her standing on the dusty street with something that might have been hope flickering to life in her chest. Owen did find work at Peterson's livery, and he took a room at the boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Grant who asked too many questions, but kept a clean establishment. He told himself he was staying because the work was decent and the pay fair, but the truth was he found himself watching for glimpses of Lydia Norton as she went about her days in Las Lunas. He saw her at the mercantile, always working, her hands busy with one task or another. He saw her at the small church on Sunday, sitting in the back pew alone, her head bowed in prayer. He saw her at the market, carefully counting out coins for meager supplies, her face calm despite her circumstances. And he saw her do something that both amazed and troubled him. 2 weeks after they had met, Owen was walking past the saloon when he heard raised voices. He looked through the window and saw Lydia standing in front of one of the Bennett brothers, the younger one named Gerald, who was clearly drunk and aggressive. Owen's hand went to his gun, but before he could move, he heard Lydia's voice, clear and strong. "I forgive you, Gerald Bennett. I forgive you for what you and your brother did to my father and to me. I won't let hatred poison my heart, no matter what you've done." Gerald had laughed, a cruel sound, and said something too low for Owen to hear that made Lydia flinch. But she held her ground, and when Gerald stumbled away, she simply turned and walked out of the saloon with her head high. She nearly collided with Owen on the boardwalk. "You shouldn't have done that," Owen said, unable to keep the concern from his voice. "Men like that take forgiveness for weakness." "Then they misunderstand what forgiveness is," Lydia replied, though her hands were shaking slightly. "It's not about being weak, Mr. Brennan. It's about being strong enough to break the cycle. He could hurt you. He already has," Lydia said simply. "What more can he do to me that hasn't already been done? I've lost my father, my home, my livelihood. All I have left is my integrity and my soul. I won't surrender those to fear." Owen walked her back to the mercantile, his presence a silent protection that Lydia found both comforting and confusing. She had not expected Owen Brennan to stay in Las Lunas, had assumed he would drift on as men like him always did. Yet here he was, seemingly settled, and she caught him watching her sometimes with an expression she couldn't quite read. As the weeks passed, they fell into an easy pattern. Owen would stop by the mercantile on his way to or from the livery, sometimes to purchase supplies but more often just to talk. They would discuss books, though neither had much chance to read, or the weather, or the small happenings of town life. Lydia found herself looking forward to these visits more than she wanted to admit, and Owen found himself making excuses to walk past the mercantile multiple times a day. Mrs. Henderson noticed, of course, and so did most of Las Lunas. Small towns had eyes everywhere, and the sight of the new cowboy courting the Norton girl became a subject of gossip and speculation. Some thought it sweet, a young woman finding happiness after tragedy. Others were more cynical, wondering what a drifter could offer someone like Lydia, who deserved stability and security. Marcus Bennett noticed too, and he didn't like it. He had been planning to pressure Lydia into selling her father's land for a fraction of its value, knowing she had no means to work it herself. But if she had a man courting her, a man who might have ideas about claiming that land through marriage, that complicated his plans. He made his displeasure known through his sons, who made a point of harassing Lydia whenever they saw her in town. It came to a head one October afternoon when Owen was finishing up at the livery. He heard shouting from the direction of the mercantile and ran toward it, his heart pounding with fear. He found Gerald and Thomas Bennett blocking the door, preventing Lydia from entering while they hurled insults and threats. "You need to sell that land, girl," Thomas was saying, his face red with drink. "My father's been more than patient, but patience runs out. You sell, or we'll make you wish you had." "I'm not selling," Lydia said firmly, though Owen could see she was frightened. "That land was my father's legacy, and I won't give it up." "Then you're a fool," Gerald said, reaching out to grab her arm. He never made contact. Owen was there in 3 strides, his hand gripping Gerald's wrist with enough force to make the younger man yelp in pain. "The lady said no. I suggest you respect that and move along." "This isn't your business, Drifter," Thomas said, though he took a step back. Owen had a reputation now in Las Lunas, a quiet word that he was not a man to cross lightly. "Anything concerning Miss Norton is my business," Owen said, his voice deadly calm. "Now you can walk away, or we can settle this another way. Your choice." The Bennett brothers left, but not before making threats that everyone on the street heard. Owen turned to Lydia, his hands gentle as he checked to make sure she was unharmed. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Lydia said, but her voice shook. "Thank you, Owen, but you shouldn't have done that. You've made enemies now." "Already had enemies," Owen said. "What's a few more?" He hesitated, then said what he had been thinking for weeks. "Lydia, you can't keep living like this in fear of what they might do next. Let me help you. Let me protect you." "I don't need protection," Lydia started to say, but Owen cut her off. "Everyone needs someone," he said. "You've been alone long enough. I have too. I know this is fast, and I know I'm not much of a catch. Just a cowboy with a past I'm not proud of and a future that's uncertain at best. But I care about you, Lydia, more than I've cared about anything in a long time. Let me stand with you. Let me be the person who helps carry this weight." Lydia looked at him. This man who had wandered into her life when she needed someone most, who had stayed when he could have left, who had shown her kindness without expecting anything in return. She thought about her father's words, spoken long ago, about recognizing good hearts even when they came in unexpected packages. Owen Brennan had a good heart. She was certain of that now. "I care about you too," Lydia admitted, the words both terrifying and liberating. "But Owen, I won't let you fight my battles for me. If we do this, if we stand together, it has to be as equals. I won't be some helpless woman you rescue. I'm stronger than that." "I know you are," Owen said, and the admiration in his voice was clear. "That's what I love about you. That's what made me want to stay in the first place. When I saw you at that creek, choosing forgiveness over revenge, choosing grace over anger, I knew I was looking at someone extraordinary. You don't need saving, Lydia. But maybe I do. Maybe we can save each other." They stood there on the boardwalk, the autumn sun warm on their faces, and something fundamental shifted between them. It wasn't just attraction, though that was there too. It was recognition, a sense of two puzzle pieces finally clicking into place. They belonged together, and they both knew it, even if the knowing was strange and new and a little frightening. "I need time," Lydia said finally. "Not because I don't know my own heart, but because I want to do this right. I want to be sure we're choosing each other for the right reasons, not just because we're both alone and scared." "Take all the time you need," Owen said. "I'm not going anywhere." But events had a way of forcing decisions faster than people preferred. 2 nights later, someone set fire to the small barn on Lydia's inherited land. It was only luck and a passing rancher that kept the blaze from spreading to the dry grassland beyond. Sheriff Daniels investigated, but found no evidence pointing to who might be responsible, though everyone in town knew the Bennetts were behind it. Owen found Lydia standing in the ashes the next morning, tears streaming down her face, though whether from smoke or grief he couldn't tell. He didn't say anything, just put his arms around her and held her while she cried. When she finally pulled back, there was steel in her eyes along with the tears. "I'm still going to forgive them," she said. "I won't let them turn me into something I'm not. But I'm also not going to be stupid about this. They're trying to drive me out to make me so afraid that I'll sell and leave. I won't do that, Owen. This land is all I have left of my father, and I'll fight for it." "Then we'll fight together," Owen said. "But we do it smart, not with guns and violence. There are other ways to win." They spent the next week consulting with the few people in Las Lunas who were brave enough to stand against Marcus Bennett's influence. Old Judge Morrison, who had retired from the bench but still had connections in Santa Fe, was particularly helpful. He reviewed the deed to Lydia's land and found that her father's claim was ironclad, with water rights that actually predated some of Bennett's holdings. "This is valuable information," Morrison said, his weathered face serious. "Bennett has been throwing his weight around for years, but he's not actually on as solid legal ground as he pretends. If you're willing to fight, Miss Norton, you might just win." "I'm willing," Lydia said firmly. The battle that followed was waged in courtrooms and land offices rather than with weapons, but it was no less intense for all that. Owen stood beside Lydia through every meeting, every filing, every confrontation with Bennett's lawyers. He watched in awe as she refused to be intimidated, as she calmly stated her case and backed it up with documentation and witnesses. She was magnificent in her quiet determination, never raising her voice, never resorting to insults or threats. She simply persisted, day after day, claiming what was rightfully hers, and through it all, she maintained her stance on forgiveness. When she encountered the Bennett brothers in town, she acknowledged them civilly. When Marcus Bennett himself confronted her outside the courthouse in Santa Fe, accusing her of being a troublesome woman who didn't know her place, she looked him in the eye and said, "I forgive you for what you've done to me and my family, Mr. Bennett. But forgiveness doesn't mean I'll let you continue to wrong me. I can forgive you and still demand justice. Those two things aren't mutually exclusive." Owen, standing beside her, saw the confusion in Bennett's face. The man had expected anger, defiance, even fear. He had no idea how to respond to forgiveness paired with firm boundaries. He blustered and threatened, but in the end, he walked away. And Owen could see that Lydia had won something important in that exchange, even if it wasn't immediately apparent. The legal battle took months, stretching through winter and into the early spring of 1879. During that time, Owen and Lydia grew closer, their relationship deepening beyond initial attraction into something more substantial and lasting. They talked about everything, from their childhoods to their dreams for the future. They learned each other's rhythms, the way Lydia hummed when she was concentrating, the way Owen rubbed the back of his neck when he was worried. Owen told her things he had never told anyone, about the men he had killed in fights that might have been avoided, about the guilt that woke him in the middle of the night. Lydia listened without judgment, then took his hands in hers and told him what he needed to hear. "You can't change the past, Owen. None of us can. All we can do is choose to be different going forward. You're a good man now. Let yourself be that man without the weight of who you used to be dragging you down." "How do you do it?" Owen asked. "How do you let go so easily?" "It's not easy," Lydia said softly. "It's the hardest thing I've ever done. Every day I have to choose forgiveness again. Every time I see the Bennett brothers, every time I walk past the place where our house used to stand, I have to actively choose not to hate them. But it gets easier with practice, and more importantly, it keeps my heart soft. Hard hearts don't heal, Owen. Soft hearts do." In February, on a cold day when snow dusted the mountains surrounding Las Lunas, the territorial judge ruled in Lydia's favor. Her claim to the land was upheld, her water rights confirmed, and Marcus Bennett was ordered to cease any interference with her property. The Bennett family was furious, but there was little they could do. The law, for once, had sided with the powerless instead of the powerful. Lydia wept when she heard the news, and Owen held her in his arms outside the courthouse, his own eyes suspiciously bright. They had won, not through violence or revenge, but through persistence and the strength of her conviction. It was a victory that meant more because of how it had been achieved. "Thank you," Lydia whispered against his chest. "I couldn't have done this without you." "You could have," Owen said truthfully. "You're the strongest person I've ever met, but I'm glad I got to stand beside you while you did it." They returned to Las Lunas as the victors in a battle the whole town had been watching. There was a celebration at the church, subdued but heartfelt, and Lydia was embraced by people who had been too afraid to support her publicly before. She accepted their congratulations graciously, without any hint of resentment toward those who had stayed silent during her struggle. Later that night, as they sat on the steps of the Mercantile under a sky full of stars, Owen worked up the courage to ask the question that had been burning in his chest for months. "Lydia, I know we've been taking things slow and I respect that, but I need you to know that I love you. I've loved you since the night at the creek when you talked about forgiveness, but I really fell hard watching you fight for what was right without losing your compassion. You've made me want to be better than I am. You've made me believe I can be." Lydia turned to look at him, her green eyes reflecting the starlight. "I love you too, Owen. I think I've known for a while now, but I was afraid to say it, afraid that if I admitted how much I cared, something would take you away from me like everything else has been taken." "I'm not going anywhere," Owen said firmly. "I've spent years drifting, looking for something I couldn't name, but I found it, Lydia. I found it in you. You're my home, my purpose, my salvation. When I see the grace you show to people who don't deserve it, when I watch you choose kindness over bitterness every single day, I see what I want to be. You make me believe in second chances." "Then marry me," Lydia said, the words out before she could second-guess them. "I know that's forward of me and I should probably let you ask, but I've learned that life is too short to waste time on proprieties. I want to build a life with you, Owen Brennan. I want to work that land together, build a home, create something beautiful from the ashes of what was lost." "Will you marry me?" Owen laughed, a sound of pure joy, and pulled her into his arms. "Yes, absolutely yes, though I wish I'd had the courage to ask first. You're always one step ahead of me, Lydia Norton." "Not anymore," she said, kissing him softly. "From now on, we walk together." They were married a month later in the small church in Las Lunas, surrounded by the community that had watched their courtship and been inspired by their story. Mrs. Henderson wept openly, declaring it the most romantic thing she had ever witnessed. Judge Morrison gave Lydia away, standing in for the father who couldn't be there. Even Sheriff Daniels attended, looking pleased that things had worked out well for once in his jurisdiction. The Bennett family did not attend, but 3 days before the wedding, Marcus Bennett rode out to the land where Owen and Lydia were beginning to rebuild. He sat on his horse for a long moment, looking uncomfortable, before finally speaking. "Miss Norton, I came to say that I'm sorry for what my boys did to your father. I won't make excuses for them or for myself. We were wrong, and you had every right to hate us. I don't understand why you don't, but I want you to know that I'm calling them off permanently. You won't have any more trouble from the Bennett family." Lydia, who had been planting seeds in the garden plot, stood and brushed the dirt from her hands. She walked over to where Bennett sat and looked up at him with clear eyes. "Thank you for saying that, Mr. Bennett. And I meant what I said before. I forgive you. Not because you've earned it, but because holding on to anger was poisoning me. I hope you find peace with what happened. I hope your sons do too." Bennett nodded, looking troubled and perhaps a little awed. He rode away without another word, and Owen came to stand beside Lydia, slipping an arm around her waist. "You're incredible," he said quietly. "I'm just trying to live the way my father taught me," Lydia replied, "with grace and forgiveness even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Their wedding day dawned clear and warm, a perfect spring morning in New Mexico. Lydia wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Henderson had helped her sew, and Owen wore new clothes that actually fit properly for once in his life. They stood before Reverend Thomas and said their vows with voices that shook with emotion but never wavered in commitment. "I promise to love you through all the days we're given," Owen said, holding Lydia's hands and looking into her eyes. I promise to stand beside you, to support your dreams, to be worthy of the grace you've shown me. You saved me, Lydia, from a life of drifting and darkness. You showed me what it means to truly forgive, to truly love. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you. You already deserve love, Owen, Lydia said, tears streaming down her face. Just by being who you are. I promise to love you fiercely and gently, to build a life with you that honors both our pasts and our future. I promise to keep choosing forgiveness, keep choosing grace, and to help you do the same. We're going to build something beautiful together, you and I. Something that proves good can come from tragedy, that love is stronger than hate. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was witnessed by a community that felt invested in their happiness. The celebration afterward was joyful, with food and music and dancing that lasted into the evening. For those few hours, the hardships of frontier life were forgotten, replaced by the simple pleasure of witnessing two people commit to loving each other. Owen and Lydia spent their wedding night in the small cabin they had built together on her land, the first structure of what would become their ranch. They made love with tenderness and passion, discovering each other in ways both physical and emotional. Afterward, lying in each other's arms, they talked about their plans for the future. I want to breed horses, Owen said, trailing his fingers through Lydia's dark hair. Good stock that can survive this territory. I've got an eye for horseflesh, and I think we could build something real there. I want a garden, Lydia said, snuggling closer to him. A big one with vegetables and flowers. I want to make this place beautiful, full of life and color, and I want children eventually when we're ready. I want to fill this home with love and laughter. How many children? Owen asked, smiling in the darkness. As many as God gives us, Lydia replied. Boys, girls, doesn't matter. I just want them to grow up knowing they're loved, knowing they're safe. I want to raise them the way my father raised me, with kindness and integrity. They'll be lucky to have you as a mother, Owen said softly. I'm lucky to have you as my wife. Sometimes I still can't believe you chose me. I didn't choose you, Lydia corrected gently. We chose each other. That's what makes it right. The first year of their marriage was hard in ways they had expected, and some they hadn't. Building a ranch from almost nothing required back-breaking work from dawn to dusk. Owen broke and trained horses while Lydia managed the household and cultivated her garden. They hired a young hand named Samuel Creek to help with the heavy labor, a quiet 18-year-old who had been orphaned young and appreciated the steady work and Lydia's motherly kindness. Money was tight, and there were setbacks. A late frost killed half of Lydia's garden. 2 of their best horses came down with colic, and Owen spent 3 sleepless nights nursing them back to health. The roof leaked during the summer monsoons, and they both got soaked trying to repair it in the middle of a thunderstorm, ending up laughing hysterically at the absurdity of it all. But there were triumphs too. Owen's reputation as a horse trainer spread, and people came from as far as Santa Fe to purchase his animals. Lydia's vegetables became sought after in Las Lunas, prized for their quality. Slowly, steadily, they built something real and lasting. And through it all, Lydia maintained her practice of forgiveness. When one of their horses was injured by a neighbor's careless fence, she helped repair the damage without demanding compensation. When supplies they had ordered went missing, likely stolen, she didn't seek revenge but simply ordered more and moved on. Owen watched her example and tried to follow it, finding that letting go of anger left more room for joy than he had ever imagined possible. In the spring of 1880, Lydia discovered she was pregnant. She told Owen on a morning when the desert was in full bloom, wildflowers painting the landscape in impossible colors. He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing with delight. "We're going to be parents," Owen said wonderingly, setting her down gently as if she might break. "I'm going to be a father." "You're going to be a wonderful father," Lydia assured him, touching his face tenderly. "Our children will be so loved." The pregnancy was relatively easy, though Lydia tired more quickly and had to scale back some of her work. Owen became almost comically protective, insisting she rest frequently and refusing to let her lift anything heavy. Lydia tolerated his hovering with amused patience, understanding it came from love rather than any belief she was fragile. In November, as winter began to settle over New Mexico, Lydia went into labor. The birth was attended by Mrs. Henderson and Doc Miller, with Owen pacing anxiously outside until Lydia insisted he come in and hold her hand. Their son was born just after midnight, a healthy baby with a strong cry and Owen's blue eyes. "What should we name him?" Owen asked, cradling his son with the careful reverence of someone holding the most precious thing in the world. "James," Lydia said softly, "after my father, James Henry Brennan. So a part of my father lives on and our son knows where he came from." Owen felt tears sting his eyes as he understood what that meant to her, this act of honoring the man who had raised her with such love, whose death had been the catalyst for everything that followed. "It's a perfect name," he said hoarsely. "James Henry Brennan. Welcome to the world, son." Fatherhood transformed Owen in ways he hadn't expected. The baby who he had feared he might not know how to love became the center of his universe alongside Lydia. He would sit for hours just watching James sleep, marveling at the tiny fingers and the soft breathing. He sang to him in a rusty voice, songs half remembered from his own childhood. He changed diapers without complaint and walked the floor during colicky nights, assuring Lydia that he didn't mind, that he wanted to be there for every moment. "You're a natural," Lydia told him one evening, watching him rock James to sleep with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his weathered exterior. "I just keep thinking about how close I came to missing this," Owen said quietly. "If I hadn't decided to ride toward Las Lunas that day, if I hadn't seen you at the creek, I'd still be drifting. I'd never have known this kind of happiness existed. You gave me this, Lydia. You and your grace, your willingness to forgive, to love, to take a chance on a broken-down cowboy. You saved my life in every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," Lydia corrected, as she always did. "I was drowning in grief and anger, and you showed me I could still trust, still open my heart. God brought us together when we both needed it most." As James grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Owen's horse breeding program earned them enough to expand, buying more land and hiring additional help. Lydia's gardens flourished, and she began teaching other women in the area her techniques for growing vegetables in the harsh New Mexico climate. They became pillars of the Las Lunas community, respected for their hard work and integrity. In 1882, Lydia gave birth to twin daughters, Clara and Rose, named after flowers she loved. The births were harder than James's had been, and for a few frightening hours, Owen thought he might lose her. But Lydia was as strong as she was gracious, and she came through it exhausted but triumphant, 2 perfect babies in her arms. 3 children, Owen said, looking at his daughters with wonder. "We have 3 children, Lydia. How did we get so lucky?" "Not luck," Lydia said tiredly but happily. "Blessings. We've been blessed beyond measure." The years that followed were full and rich, marked by the ordinary miracles of family life. James grew into a thoughtful boy who loved horses as much as his father did. Clara was adventurous and bold, always climbing things she shouldn't and getting into minor mischief. Rose was quieter, more like Lydia, with a tender heart that felt things deeply. Owen taught his children to ride, to care for animals, to work hard and take pride in a job well done. Lydia taught them to read and write, to appreciate beauty, and most importantly, to forgive. When James came home upset because another boy had hit him at school, Lydia sat him down and explained about choosing forgiveness over retaliation. "But Mama, he hit me first," James protested. "Don't I get to hit him back?" "You could," Lydia said gently. "But then he'll hit you again and you'll hit him and it will never end. Or you can be the bigger person. You can forgive him, set a boundary that you won't be treated that way and walk away." "That takes more courage than fighting, James. Anyone can throw a punch. It takes real strength to choose peace." James didn't fully understand then, but as he grew older, he would remember his mother's words. All three children would grow up embodying the lessons their parents taught through word and example, becoming people of integrity and compassion. In 1885, Marcus Bennett died of a heart attack, and to everyone's surprise, his will included a letter addressed to Lydia. Owen rode into town with her to hear it read at the lawyer's office. The letter was brief but profound. "Mrs. Brennan, I have never understood how you could forgive my sons and me for what we did to your family. I still don't understand it. But I want you to know that your forgiveness haunted me in the best possible way. It made me examine my life and my choices, and I found myself wanting. I cannot undo the harm I caused, but I have tried in recent years to be better. I have made amends where possible and changed my will to be more equitable to those I wronged. I am leaving you the water rights to Silver Creek, which rightfully should have been your father's anyway. I hope you will accept this as a small gesture toward making things right. You taught me something I didn't want to learn but desperately needed to know. Thank you." Lydia wept as the letter was read, and Owen held her hand tightly. The water rights to Silver Creek were valuable, enough to ensure their ranch would thrive for generations. But more valuable than the land was the confirmation that her grace had made a difference, that choosing forgiveness over hatred had rippled out in ways she could never have predicted. "He changed," Lydia whispered to Owen as they left the lawyer's office. "Because I forgave him, he found it in himself to change. Do you see, Owen? This is why it matters. This is why we have to keep choosing grace." "I see," Owen said, though his voice was thick with emotion. "I've been seeing it for 7 years now, every day I've spent with you." "You changed me too, Lydia. You changed everything." Gerald and Thomas Bennett, inheriting less than they had expected due to their father's amended will, left Las Lunas shortly after their father's death. Before they left, Gerald came to the Brennan ranch. Owen was immediately protective, positioning himself between Gerald and Lydia, but Gerald held up his hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Gerald said, looking older than his 35 years, worn down by drink and disappointment. "I'm leaving tomorrow, and I wanted to say something before I go. Mrs. Brennan, I've been carrying guilt for what we did to your father for 7 years now. It's eaten at me, knowing I killed a good man over nothing, over land and water that didn't matter in the end. I don't expect you to forgive me." "But I already have," Lydia said quietly. "I told you so years ago." "I know you said the words," Gerald replied, "but I didn't believe you meant them. I thought it was some trick or game. But watching you over the years, seeing the life you've built, the person you are, I finally understand. You really did forgive me. You let go of your anger and chose to be happy instead. I don't know how you did it, but I'm grateful you did. It's the only thing that's given me any peace. I forgave you because holding on to anger would have destroyed me," Lydia said, stepping forward despite Owen's protective instincts. "Not because you deserved it, Gerald, but because I deserved to be free. I hope you can forgive yourself now." I hope you can find peace and build a better life wherever you're going." Gerald nodded, his eyes suspiciously bright, and left without another word. Owen watched him ride away, then turned to his wife with an expression of profound love. "You just did it again," he said. "Gave grace to someone who didn't deserve it and might have changed his life in the process. Do you ever get tired of being so good?" "I'm not good," Lydia protested. "I'm just trying to live by the principles I believe in, and I fail at it sometimes, Owen. There are days when I'm angry, when I want to hold grudges. But I keep trying, because the alternative is becoming bitter, and I won't let that happen." As their children grew, Owen and Lydia made sure to tell them the story of how they met, how forgiveness and grace had brought them together and built the life they enjoyed. They told the story not to make themselves seem heroic, but to teach a lesson about the power of choosing love over hate, mercy over revenge. James, at 15, asked his father once why he had stayed in Las Lunas all those years ago when he could have just kept drifting. Owen thought carefully before answering. "I saw something in your mother that I had never seen before," Owen said. "True grace. She had every reason to be consumed with anger and desire for revenge, but instead she chose forgiveness. That choice, that display of incredible strength, showed me what real courage looks like. It made me want to be better than I was. And the more I got to know her, the more I realized I had found something I didn't even know I was looking for, my salvation. Your mother saved me from myself, son. Her grace gave me a reason to stop running and start building something real." The ranch continued to flourish through the years. By 1890, the Brennan spread was one of the most successful in the territory, known for quality horses and the integrity of its owners. Owen and Lydia employed over a dozen workers, treating them fairly and paying them well. Several of their hands were men with troubled pasts, given second chances by employers who believed in redemption. Lydia remained active in the community, helping to establish a school in Las Lunas and teaching Sunday school at the church. She became known as someone people could turn to in times of trouble, someone who would listen without judgment and offer help without conditions. Her reputation for forgiveness and grace spread beyond Las Lunas, and people would sometimes travel considerable distances just to talk to her, seeking advice on how to let go of anger and move forward. Owen supported her in all of it, proud of the woman he had married and the life they had built together. He never lost his sense of wonder at having found her, at having been given this second chance. Every morning he woke up grateful, and every night he went to sleep thanking God for the day at the creek when everything changed. In 1893, Las Lunas celebrated its 25th anniversary as an incorporated town, and the community decided to honor citizens who had made significant contributions. Owen and Lydia were among those recognized, and they stood before the gathered crowd feeling humbled and grateful. The mayor, a jovial man named Richard Foster, spoke about their contributions to the community, their business success, their charitable works. But then he said something that made both Owen and Lydia tear up. "But more than all of that," Mayor Foster said, "Owen and Lydia Brennan have taught us something invaluable about the power of forgiveness and grace. Their story, of how they met and fell in love, of how Lydia chose to forgive those who wronged her terribly, has inspired countless people in this community. They've shown us that we don't have to be defined by the worst things that happen to us, that we can choose to respond with grace rather than bitterness. Las Lunas is a better place because they are in it, and we're honored to recognize them today." After the ceremony, as people congratulated them and shared their own stories of forgiveness and second chances, Owen pulled Lydia aside for a moment alone. "Did you ever imagine, back when you were crying by that creek, that this is where we'd end up?" He asked, gesturing to the life they had built, the community that surrounded them, the children who were their legacy. "No," Lydia admitted. "In that moment, I could barely see past the next day. I was just trying to survive my grief without letting it destroy me. But I believed that choosing forgiveness was right, even if I couldn't see where it would lead. And it led me to you, Owen. It led us to this beautiful life. That's the thing about grace. You can't always see where it will take you, but you have to trust that the path is worth walking." "I would have been lost without you," Owen said, cupping her face in his hands. "Still drifting, still running from my past, still thinking I was beyond redemption. You showed me that everyone deserves forgiveness, including myself. You loved me when I didn't deserve it and believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. That's grace, Lydia. That's what saved me." They kissed while the celebration continued around them. Two people who had found each other at the right moment, who had chosen love over hate, forgiveness over revenge, and built something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy. Their children grew into remarkable adults. James took over more responsibility for the ranch, showing the same skill with horses that his father possessed. Clara, spirited and independent, became a teacher, educating children throughout the territory. Rose, gentle and artistic, began painting landscapes that captured the stark beauty of New Mexico. Her works eventually displayed in galleries as far away as Denver and San Francisco. In 1897, James married a kind woman named Elizabeth Morris, and in 1898, they gave Owen and Lydia their first grandchild, a boy named Owen Peter after his grandfather. Holding his grandson for the first time, Owen felt the circle complete, felt the full weight of the blessing his life had become. "Your grandmother saved me," Owen whispered to the sleeping baby. "And now you're here because she had the courage to forgive, to love, to take a chance on a broken cowboy. That's your legacy, little one. Grace and forgiveness and the belief that people can change." As the century drew to a close, Owen and Lydia, both in their late 40s now, spent more time reflecting on the life they had built together. They would sit on the porch of their ranch house in the evenings, watching the sun set over the land they had fought for and cultivated, and talk about all the blessings they had received. "You ever regret it?" Owen asked one evening. "Choosing forgiveness instead of revenge?" "Because I know there are people who think you were weak, that you should have made the Bennetts pay more for what they did." "Never," Lydia said firmly. "Not once. Yes, I still grieve my father. There are days when the loss hits me as fresh as it did 17 years ago. But I don't regret choosing grace over hatred. Look at what we've built, Owen. Look at our children, our grandchildren, this life we have. None of this would exist if I had let anger consume me. Revenge would have given me momentary satisfaction, but long-term emptiness. Forgiveness gave me everything." "You gave me everything," Owen corrected. "I was nobody, just another drifter with a gun and a past. You saw something in me worth saving. Your grace changed my life, Lydia. It gave me purpose and meaning and a future I never dreamed possible." "We gave each other everything," Lydia said, taking his hand. "That's what love is, Owen. Not one person saving another, but two people choosing to walk through life together, supporting each other, forgiving each other's flaws, celebrating each other's triumphs. We built this together." In 1900, as New Mexico stood on the cusp of the new century, Las Lunas threw a celebration. Owen and Lydia attended with their children and grandchildren, now numbering 5 with the recent births of James and Elizabeth's second child and Clara's first. They walked through the town that had become their home, greeting friends and neighbors, remembered as the couple who had shown everyone the power of forgiveness. Young people approached Lydia, asking her advice about conflicts and hurts in their own lives. She always gave them the same answer, refined by years of practice and reflection. Forgiveness isn't about pretending the hurt didn't happen or saying it was okay, Lydia would explain. It's about choosing not to let that hurt define you going forward. It's about setting yourself free from the prison of anger and resentment. The person who wronged you may not deserve your forgiveness, but you deserve the peace that comes from letting go. That's why you do it, not for them, but for yourself. Owen would stand nearby during these conversations, watching his wife share the wisdom she had lived by for over 2 decades, and fall in love with her all over again. The years had added lines to her face and silver to her dark hair, but to him, she was as beautiful as the day he had first seen her by the creek, choosing grace in the face of tragedy. As they walked home that night, their grandchildren tucked into wagons and sleeping peacefully, Owen pulled Lydia close. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what? For everything. For forgiving those who wronged you, for seeing something worth saving in me, for building this life with me. For showing me every single day what real strength looks like. I spent the first 26 years of my life lost, and I've spent the last 22 years found, all because of you and your grace. You're my salvation, Lydia Brennan. You always will be." Lydia smiled, the same smile that had captivated him all those years ago, full of warmth and love and unshakable faith in the goodness that could exist in the world despite all evidence to the contrary. "And you're mine," she said. "You showed me that I could trust again, that I could love again, that my father's death didn't have to be the end of my story, but could be the beginning of something new. We saved each other, Owen. That's what makes our story special." They stood there in the New Mexico night, the stars brilliant overhead, the land they had fought for spread out around them, their family safe and thriving, and knew that they had found what so many people searched for but never discovered. A love built on mutual respect, shared values, and the transformative power of grace and forgiveness. The years continued to pass, bringing new joys and sorrows as years do. Clara married a newspaperman from Santa Fe and gave them 3 more grandchildren. Rose found love with an artist who traveled through Las Lunas and was captivated both by her paintings and her gentle spirit. They settled nearby, adding to the family gatherings that became increasingly large and boisterous. James and Elizabeth eventually had 6 children total, taking over more of the ranch operations as Owen began to slow down. Owen didn't mind stepping back, finding joy in teaching his grandchildren to ride and sharing stories of the old days. He never tired of telling them about how he met their grandmother, always emphasizing the lesson at the heart of their story. "Your grandmother taught me that forgiveness isn't weakness," he would say, children gathered at his feet. "It's the greatest strength there is. She had every reason to hate, every justification for revenge, and she chose grace instead. That choice changed not just her life, but mine, and eventually all of yours. You're here because she was brave enough to forgive, wise enough to let go of anger, and gracious enough to give a broken cowboy a chance at redemption." In 1908, on a warm spring morning when the desert was in bloom and life seemed particularly sweet, Owen and Lydia celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary. Their children organized a party that brought together what seemed like half of Las Lunas, all gathered to celebrate a marriage that had become legendary in the community. James stood to give a toast, his voice thick with emotion. "My parents have shown us all what love really means. Not the easy love of good times, but the hard love that chooses forgiveness, that works through challenges, that builds something lasting brick by brick. They've created not just a successful ranch, but a legacy of grace that will continue through all of us." To Owen and Lydia Brennan, The best parents and grandparents anyone could ask for, and proof that good can come from even the worst tragedies. The crowd cheered and toasted, and Owen and Lydia stood together, overwhelmed by the love surrounding them. Later, when the party had wound down and they were alone on their porch watching another spectacular sunset, Lydia leaned against Owen's shoulder. "We did good," she said softly. "We did better than good," Owen replied. "We did extraordinary. And it all started with you choosing forgiveness when anyone would have understood if you had chosen hate. That choice, Lydia, that moment when you decided to forgive the Bennett brothers despite everything they had done, that's when our story really began. That's when I saw your grace and knew I had found my salvation." "I'm glad you stayed," Lydia said. "I'm glad you saw past my grief and anger to whatever it was that made you want to help me. I'm glad you were patient while I figured out how to trust again. I'm glad for every day we've had together." "So am I," Owen said. "So am I." They continued like this through the next decade, aging gracefully together, watching their family grow and flourish. The ranch remained successful under James's management, with Owen serving as an advisor and teacher to his grandchildren who showed interest in the horse breeding business. Lydia remained active in the community, her reputation for wisdom and grace only growing with the years. In 1915, when Owen was 63 and Lydia 60, they took a trip to Santa Fe, something they had talked about doing for years but never quite managed. They stayed in a nice hotel, attended the theater, visited art galleries that displayed Rose's paintings. It was a second honeymoon of sorts, a chance to remember that they were not just parents and grandparents, but also husband and wife, partners who had built an extraordinary life together. On their last night in Santa Fe, sitting in a restaurant nicer than any they had ever patronized, Owen reached across the table to take Lydia's hand. "I want you to know something," he said seriously. "I want you to know that if I could go back and live my life again, I wouldn't change a single thing. Not the hard times before I met you, because they led me to that creek. Not the struggles we faced building the ranch, because they made us stronger. Not even the sorrows we've experienced, because they taught us to appreciate the joys. Every moment, good and bad, brought us to where we are now, and where we are is exactly where I want to be." "I feel the same," Lydia said, her green eyes, faded now but still sharp and kind, looking at him with the same love she had shown for nearly 4 decades. "You've been my partner, my love, my best friend. You've supported my crazy ideas about forgiveness and grace. You've built a life with me that exceeded every dream I had, and you've loved me through youth and middle age and now into our older years. I couldn't have asked for a better husband or a better life." They returned to Las Lunas renewed, ready for whatever years remained to them. Those years were good ones, full of the ordinary pleasures of long marriage and family life. They celebrated more weddings as grandchildren married, welcomed great-grandchildren into the world, and continued to be pillars of the Las Lunas community. In 1920, Lydia fell ill with pneumonia. At 65, she had remained relatively healthy, but the illness hit her hard. Owen barely left her side, holding her hand through the long nights when her fever raged, praying in ways he hadn't prayed since the early days of their marriage, when he had been learning how to have faith again. Lydia recovered, though it took months for her to regain her full strength. During her convalescence, Owen took over all her usual tasks, managing the household and even taking over her Sunday school class. He did it willingly, even joyfully, grateful for every day he still had her with him. "You're fussing," Lydia told him one afternoon when he insisted she rest instead of working in her garden. "I'm caring," Owen corrected. "There's a difference. You took care of me for 37 years, letting me lean on your strength. Now it's your turn to lean on mine." "I've always leaned on your strength," Lydia said softly. "Right from the start. You just didn't realize how much I needed you because I was busy being strong for everyone else. But you were my rock, Owen. You still are." By 1922, both Owen and Lydia were beginning to feel their age more acutely. Owen's joints ached in the morning and Lydia tired more easily. But they remained active in their family's life, present for every important moment, still offering wisdom and love to anyone who asked. That year, a young woman came to Las Lunas, alone and pregnant, fleeing an abusive situation. She was ostracized by some in the community, judged harshly for her circumstances. Lydia, now 67 and still fierce in her compassion, immediately took the woman under her wing, providing her with work and housing and defending her against those who would condemn her. Owen, watching his wife extend the same grace to this stranger that she had practiced her whole life, felt his love for her deepen even further. She never changed, never wavered in her commitment to forgiveness and compassion, no matter what the world threw at her. "Why do you do it?" The young woman, whose name was Martha, asked Lydia one day. "Why help someone like me when it just brings you criticism?" "Because everyone deserves grace," Lydia said simply. "Everyone deserves a second chance, an opportunity to change their circumstances and build something better. I was given grace when I needed it most, and I've spent my life trying to pay that forward. You're not defined by your past, Martha. You get to decide who you want to be going forward." Martha stayed in Las Lunas, eventually marrying a good man who loved her and her child, and she would later say that Lydia Brennan had saved her life. It was one of dozens of similar stories that circulated through the community, testaments to the impact one woman's commitment to forgiveness and grace had made over the course of a lifetime. As Owen and Lydia moved into their 70s, they began to slow down more noticeably. James and Elizabeth had taken over the ranch entirely, though Owen still offered advice when asked. Lydia's garden, once vast, became smaller and more manageable, but they remained together, still in love, still each other's best friend and closest confidant. On a cool evening in October of 1925, they sat on their porch, wrapped in blankets against the chill, watching the sunset paint the New Mexico sky in brilliant colors. They were quiet, comfortable in the silence that comes from decades of marriage, but finally, Owen spoke. "I've been thinking about that night we met," he said. 47 years ago now. I can still see you so clearly, kneeling by that creek, crying but also praying. I can still remember the feeling I had watching you, knowing somehow that you were going to change my life. And I can still remember looking up and seeing you," Lydia said. "This stranger who offered help when he could have just ridden by. I was so lost that night, Owen, so broken and alone and scared. But you showed me kindness, and that kindness opened a door I thought had been closed forever." "You showed me what real courage looks like," Owen said. "Choosing forgiveness over revenge, grace over anger, that took more bravery than anything I had ever done. You saved me, Lydia. Your grace became my salvation. I was a lost soul until I found you." "And you saved me too," Lydia reminded him gently. "You gave me a reason to hope again, to believe that good things could still happen after tragedy. You stood beside me through everything, never trying to fight my battles but always there to support me. You loved me when I was at my worst, and you've loved me every day since. That's grace too, Owen. That's what marriage is supposed to be." They fell quiet again, holding hands as the sun finally dipped below the horizon. Neither of them said it, but they both felt it, a sense of completion, of a circle finally coming fully closed. They had lived a good life, a full life, a life that mattered. They had loved deeply and been loved in return. They had built something lasting, not just in their ranch and their family, but in the example they had set for everyone around them. Owen passed away peacefully in his sleep on a cold November night in 1926, at the age of 74. Lydia woke to find him beside her, still holding her hand even in death, a slight smile on his weathered face. She wept for the loss but also felt grateful for the nearly 50 years they had shared, for the love that had sustained them through everything. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, testament to the impact Owen had made on the community. Person after person stood to share stories of his kindness, his integrity, his skill with horses, and most of all, his devotion to his wife and family. James delivered the eulogy, his voice breaking as he talked about his father. "My father always said that my mother saved him," James said, "that her grace and forgiveness gave him a reason to stop drifting and start building something real. But what he didn't always say was that he saved her too. They saved each other, and in doing so, they created a legacy that will continue through all of us. My father was a good man, made better by loving a woman who showed him what true grace looked like." Lydia stood by Owen's grave long after everyone else had left, one hand resting on the freshly turned earth. "Thank you," she whispered, "for staying when you could have left, for loving me when I needed it most, for building this life with me, for being my partner in all things. I'll see you again, my love. Until then, I'll keep living by the principles we shared, keep showing grace and forgiveness to everyone I meet. That's how I'll honor your memory." She lived another 7 years, remaining active in the community despite her grief. She spent time with her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, sharing stories and wisdom and continuing to model the grace that had defined her entire life. People still came to her seeking advice, and she still gave it freely, her message unchanged after decades. Forgiveness was not weakness but strength. Grace was not surrender but victory, and choosing love over hate was the bravest thing anyone could do. On a spring morning in 1933, when the desert was blooming and the world felt full of promise, Lydia passed away peacefully at the age of 77. She was buried beside Owen, their graves marked with simple headstones that bore their names, dates, and a single inscription chosen by their children. She forgave those who wronged her. He saw her grace and found his salvation. Together they built a legacy of love. The community mourned, but they also celebrated a life well lived. At her funeral, attended by even more people than Owen's had been, person after person shared stories of how Lydia had impacted their lives through her example of forgiveness and grace. Martha, the young woman Lydia had helped years before, spoke through tears about how Lydia had saved her when she had nowhere else to turn. Former ranch hands talked about how Lydia and Owen had given them second chances when no one else would. Community members spoke of her wisdom, her kindness, her unwavering commitment to living by her principles even when it cost her. But perhaps the most moving tribute came from an unexpected source. An elderly man, well-dressed and clearly prosperous, stood and introduced himself as Thomas Bennett, one of the men who had killed Lydia's father over 50 years earlier. "I don't expect most of you to understand why I'm here," Thomas said, his voice shaking. "My brother and I committed a terrible crime against Mrs. Brennan and her family. We took her father's life over a piece of land that meant nothing. We deserved her hatred, her desire for revenge. Instead, she forgave us. She looked us in the eye multiple times over the years and told us she forgave us, that she wouldn't let our evil plant seeds in her heart." Thomas paused, wiping his eyes. "I didn't understand it then. I thought she was weak or stupid or playing some kind of game. But as years passed and I watched her build a life with Owen, watched her continue to extend grace to everyone she met, I finally understood. She was stronger than any of us. Strong enough to forgive, strong enough to let go of anger, strong enough to choose love even when hate would have been justified. Her example haunted me in the best possible way. It made me examine my own life and try to be better. I can never make up for what I did, but I've spent the last 3 decades trying to live differently because Lydia Brennan showed me what true strength looked like. She saved my soul through her grace, and I will be forever grateful. There wasn't a dry eye in the church when Thomas sat down. The message was clear. Lydia's choice to forgive, made in the depths of her grief over 50 years earlier, had rippled out in ways she could never have fully known, changing lives and transforming hearts across decades. After the service, as people gathered at the ranch house for a meal and to share memories, James gathered his siblings and their families together. "We need to make sure we continue what Mom and Dad started," he said firmly. "This legacy of forgiveness and grace, this commitment to treating people with dignity and giving second chances, this is who we are as a family. We can't let it end with them." And they didn't. The Brennan family continued to be known throughout New Mexico for their integrity, compassion, and willingness to extend grace to those who needed it. They continued to run the ranch successfully, maintaining the high standards Owen had established while also creating jobs and opportunities for people who needed them. They continued to be active in the Las Lunas community, supporting the school, the church, and various charitable causes. The story of Owen and Lydia became part of local legend, told and retold as an example of how love could triumph over tragedy, how forgiveness could break cycles of violence and hatred, how grace could transform not just individual lives but entire communities. Young couples would visit their graves, hoping that some of the love and commitment Owen and Lydia had shared would bless their own marriages. People facing difficult decisions about whether to forgive those who had wronged them would remember Lydia's example and find the courage to choose grace over revenge. Decades later, when Las Lunas celebrated its centennial, the community erected a monument in the town square honoring citizens who had made the greatest impact on the town's character and development. Owen and Lydia Brennan were among those commemorated, with a plaque that told their story and the lessons they had taught through their lives and their love. The plaque read, "Owen and Lydia Brennan came to Las Lunas in 1878, 2 people broken by loss and circumstances. Through their love for each other and their commitment to forgiveness and grace, they built not just a successful ranch, but a legacy that continues to inspire. Lydia forgave those who wronged her, choosing grace over revenge. Owen saw her courage and found his salvation. Together, they showed us that love is stronger than hate, that forgiveness is stronger than bitterness, and that choosing grace is the bravest thing anyone can do." Their story reminds us that we are not defined by what happens to us, but by how we choose to respond. May we all have the courage to follow their example. The Brennan Ranch continued through generations, always run by family members who understood that they were stewards of more than just land and horses. They were stewards of a legacy, keepers of a story that mattered, guardians of principles that had the power to change lives. Each generation told the younger ones about Owen and Lydia, about how they met, about the choices they made, about the life they built together through love and forgiveness and unwavering grace. And so the impact of one woman's choice to forgive, made in grief by a creek outside Las Lunas in 1878, continued to ripple outward through time, touching lives that would never know her name but would benefit from the example she had set. Her grace had indeed been Owen's salvation, but it had also been salvation for countless others who learned from her example that forgiveness was possible, that grace could triumph over hatred, and that love was always, always worth choosing. In the end, that was the true legacy of Owen and Lydia Brennan. Not the ranch they built or the money they earned or even the children they raised, but the principle they lived by and taught to everyone they met. That forgiveness was not weakness but strength, that grace was not surrender but victory, and that choosing love in the face of hatred was the most courageous thing anyone could do. They had lived that truth every day of their lives together, and in doing so, they had changed not just their own stories, but the stories of everyone they touched. Their love story, born from tragedy and built on forgiveness, became eternal, a testament to the transformative power of grace and the salvation that comes from choosing love over hate. And though they were gone, their legacy lived on in the land they had nurtured, the family they had raised, the community they had served, and the countless lives they had touched through their example of what it meant to truly forgive, to truly love, and to truly live with grace.